So hello everyone, my name is Yasin and I'm going to be your instructor in the Linux basic course. So without wasting our time, let's dive into course. Overview of Linux. As we know, Linux is an open source operating system which is based on Unix community model. It was initially released by Linus Torvalds on September 17, 1991. Initially, Linux was created for personal computers. Nowadays, Linux is also used in embedded systems like routers, automation controls, television, digital video recorders, video game consoles, smartwatches, and etc. The most important thing in Linux is it is open source and the source code is freely available so that anyone can modify it and contribute towards Linux development. History of Linux. Linux was created by Linus Torvalds in the year 1991. Linus was a student in the University of Helsinki. Linus built Linux operating system as a free and open source and which was alternative to Minix. And Linux was used in academics. That means Linux operating system they are using for their academic purposes. How Linux works. Nowadays Linux is used everywhere from phones to the supercomputer. Now most important thing, every Linux OS contains Linux kernel. Linux kernel connects or communicate with hardware in binary language. It sends signal to a hardware and it receives signal from hardware. Linux root. Root is a default username in an Linux operating system, which has access to all commands and files. And it is also known as a root user, root account, or super user. Root privileges. Root privileges has complete access over system and files. It has such a power that it can modify completely system. Root user home directory start with a forward slash and a home directory is a primary repository of user's file which includes that the user's configuration files. Linux features. Linux support multiple user capability. That means at a time more than one user can log in into same system. And each user has their own privileges. Multitasking. More than one function or application can run at a time simultaneously in a Linux. Linux Live CD or USB system. In Linux Live CD or USB, without installing Linux operating system, we can run it directly with Live USB or CD. GUI. Linux originally made for command line interface, but now it's also support graphical user interface. Open source. Linux source code is freely available, so anyone can contribute towards development of Linux. Advantages of Linux. Linux is a completely open source. That means source code is freely available on internet and market. Security. Linux provides high security to its users. Customization. In Linux, customization is at next level. That means you can customize according to your needs. Multiple user support. At a time, many users can log in into same system. Free to use. Large community support. Linux has very big community which help us or which give support to solve with errors. Stability. Linux is a highly stable compared to Windows and other operating system. Privacy. In Linux, privacy is very highly maintained. Performance. Since Linux iOS file has very small size, so it takes very less RAM and it performs very and its performance is very good. Multitasking. At a time, many applications can be run into a Linux. Architecture of Linux. Architecture of Linux include hardware, kernel, system libraries, shells, applications. Let's go into more detail. Hardware. Hardware, it is a place where all the physical electronic devices attaches to each other and perform different kinds of tasks. For example, CPU, RAM, monitor, and etc. Kernel. Kernel, it is a main part of computer, or you can say it is a heart of computer, where software part of computer is communicate with hardware part of computer. Linux kernel is designed with the C language. Kernel performs various tasks such as a memory management, process management, device drivers. Memory management. It tracks how much memory required to run a software, and according to that it will allocate memory to that particular software. Process management. It determines how much processing power is required to perform particular task, and according to that it will allocate the processing power to that task. Device drive. Kernel also acts as an interpreter between hardware and processes. System libraries. System libraries, those are the special functions or programs. By using those libraries, application software accesses kernel features. Shell. Shell is an interface which takes input from user and send to kernel, and also takes output from kernel and send back to the user. Application or software programs. Those are the programs or application which runs in the shell. That means whatever the program or script running on the shell, those are known as a software or applications. For example, Google Chrome and Firefox and many more. System requirement for Linux. Linux is a lightweight operating system which can run smoothly on any old computer system, which having RAM greater than 512 MB. CPU requirement. CPU with minimum 1.5 GHz can run comfortably in the Linux. RAM. Minimum RAM is 512 MB is required, and recommended is 2 GHz, 2 GB or higher than that. GPU. GPU is actually not needed, but according to works it's required. Means if you are performing graphical works, then only GPU it's required. Disk space. Minimum a 20 GB of hard disk is required to run a Linux. Types of Linux. There are wide varieties of Linux operating systems are available, but few famous are listed here. Those are Debian, Gentoo, Red Hat Enterprises, Fedora, CentOS, and Kali Linux. Debian. Debian is used as a primary OS. It has all the features of GUI, graphic user interface, and it is easy to use. Debian is used by millions of users, and it is most popular type of the Linux. Gentoo. Gentoo is another distribution of Linux which is built for professionals, network administrators who are expert in a Linux. Gentoo was made for those who want to learn and understand how Linux is going to be work. Red Hat Enterprises. Red Hat Enterprises Linux was built for enterprises or commercial purpose. Red Hat Enterprises Linux is especially used for IT professionals and large companies for making their system secure and reliable. CentOS. CentOS is a Linux community project which gives us a reliable and open source ecosystem. It is completely based on Red Hat Enterprises Linux. CentOS is also most popular flavorous type of Linux which is mostly used in colleges and companies. It has almost every features of Red Hat Enterprises Linux. Fedora. Fedora is the most user-friendly operating system which is suitable for beginners who are new into the Linux operating system. It is flexible and powerful just like CentOS and Red Hat Enterprises. Fedora is handy for developers and students. Kali Linux. It is developed and maintained by Offensive Securities. Kali Linux specially built for penetration and digital forensic. It comes with tons of pre-installed tools. Kali Linux is one of the most recognized Linux flavorants. Kali Linux is developed by cybersecurity experts and students who are into the penetration testing.